Welcome to the deep dive. We're pulling back the curtain today on some really fascinating, sometimes challenging ideas from the mind of Ralph Waldo Emerson.
That's right. We've got a stack of his essays and biographical sketches here, pieces like Demonology, Aristocracy, Education, and his personal takes on people he knew well, like Dr. Ezra Ripley, Mary Moody Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, the Concord crowd.
Our mission today is really to, well, cut through some of that 19th century prose, maybe, and get to the heart of the key insights Emerson drew just from looking around at society, nature, people.
Yeah, and see how these ideas, these sort of classic American thoughts, maybe still hit home today or maybe challenge how we see things now.
Think of it as exploring some foundational American thinking, but through Emerson's own lens, which is often surprisingly personal, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And often quite witty, too. And he doesn't exactly start where you might expect a philosopher to start.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because he kicks us off with something called demonology. Now, if you hear that word and think, devils and horns.
Right. That's not it at all. He's defining it very differently. It's about experiences which shun rather than core inquiry.
Things like dreams, omens, coincidences, luck.
Exactly. Sortilege, divination, things we often dismiss. He thinks they deserve a look because, well, he says everyone has 2 or 3 hints in this kind in their life that really stick with them.
So these fleeting, hard-to-pin-down things, he thinks they show us something about ourselves, about our own structure.
Yeah, that's the idea. And he really leans into dreams here.
Right. He calls sleep a soft enchantress, but then there's that darker side, the witchcraft of sleep.
Leading people to do strenuous things for, well, nothings and absurdities, and waking up with that ghastly laughter. It's quite a phrase.
It is. And the idea that dreams are jealous of being remembered, like they just evaporate when you try to grab them.
Yeah, they slip away. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. He argues dreams show a double consciousness.
Double consciousness, subconscious and objective, he says.
Right. And through that, they show that every action, every thought is basically bipolar.
Bipolar? How does he mean that here? Not clinically, obviously.
No, he means paired, balanced, like his example. If I strike, I am struck. If I chase, I am pursued. There's always a counterforce, an inherent echo.
Okay, so the dream world, in its weird logic, actually reflects these deep, almost like universal laws. Karmic, maybe?
That's pretty much it. He talks about wise, sometimes terrible hints coming from an unknown intelligence. You might be startled, he says, a few times in life by the sheer justice and meaning in this phantasmagoria.
Phantasmagoria, great word.
Isn't it? And he even touches on their prophetic character, how they might be the maturation of thoughts we haven't fully formed consciously yet, like ideas bubbling up from below.
But he's not telling us to, base our life decisions on last night's dream, is he? He pulls back a bit.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
He critiques getting too mystical. He mentions talking mysteriously of the demonological and calls it somewhat willful, some play at blind man's buff.
Right, like trying to find shortcuts.
Yeah.
He mentions conspiracies to get advantages without paying the price.
Exactly. The ring of Gyges' invisibility to get away with things, or using secret codes for low purposes. He sees a danger there.
He calls the deepest flattery the flattery of omens. That's cutting.
Right.
Like, don't look for signs to tell you what you want to hear.
Precisely. He thinks this fascination with omens and luck demonology is the shadow of theology. It happens when people haven't really grasped the connection between their own character, their actions, and their place in the world.
So it all comes back to the self, in a way.
Yes. He wraps it up saying, the whole world is an omen and a sign. Why look so wistfully in a corner? The real divination is everywhere, he thinks, unheard. It points us back to the meaning in everyday existence, not just the weird stuff.
Okay, so from this kind of hidden, intuitive world, Emerson then pivots hard.
A really sharp turn, right into the structures of society. He starts talking about aristocracy.
And again, not just dukes and earls, right? He's looking for something more fundamental.
Yeah, the permanent traits. An interest in this idea that he thinks is inevitable, sacred, found everywhere.
And for him, the core isn't the title, it's being what does he say? A man of honor, accomplished in all arts and generosities, the true gentleman.
Exactly. And he connects it to culture, saying a reference to society is part of the idea of culture. It's not just an individual thing.
He even argues that a hard utilitarian, someone totally practical, would value this if they valued themselves, because the highest good is the highest society.
He's straight up affirming that inequalities exist, not just in clothes or rank, but in the powers of expression and action, a primitive aristocracy.
People with a military mind. energy, courage,
Mm.
the ones who see potential.
Yes. The ones who see what they should do with an estate, not just what anyone could do. Men born to command, he says, who come into the world booted and spurred to ride.
That's a very vivid image.
It is, and he insists that this kind of real power, this innate ability, makes its own place. He says, quite simply, we pass for what we are.
Your own spine is the best lightning rod. I like that. Inner strength.
Right, and he thinks this right aristocracy, the one based on merit, isn't harmful. It's a provocation to the bold, something that inspires others. He sees it working everywhere, England, America, France, where original talent gets respect, just like in ancient times when someone was chosen for their specific knack.
But he warns it can go wrong, right? If genius gets lazy or irresponsible.
Absolutely. It degenerates when those with ability grow idle and wanton and reckless of its fine duties, using their gifts for silly extravagances instead of earning respect through contribution.
So the real aristocracy are those incomparably superior to the populace in capability, the ones who show the way, do what others can't. He uses eloquence as an example of genius unlocking chains, giving this sense of liberty and power.
And I think this contrast he draws is really insightful, dealing with the great, where there's mutual respect, versus dealing with the vulgar, which he says reduces life to beggary.
Being treated just for your utility, for what you can do for someone, that starves the imagination.
Yeah, starves the imagination and the sentiment, he says. He urges people to basically emancipate themselves from that kind of interaction.
So it's really a call for a meritocracy based on character and ability, not just position.
Pretty much, yeah. A meritocracy of the whole person.
So thinking about this for you listening, Emerson links this inner unseen world of dreams and intuition with, external power and social structure. He's arguing true influence comes from inherent ability and character. Do you see this kind of primitive aristocracy based on skill and character playing out in the world around you, maybe in your workplace or communities, in ways we don't always label that way?
It's a good question. And from there, Emerson moves deeper still, seeing these really profound, almost unbreakable connections between the physical world, the moral world, and the power of thought itself.
He starts with science facts. Earths as burnt metals, oxygen in the crust, diamonds turning to smoke. Surprising stuff for his time, I guess.
Right. Examples of nature's fundamental makeup. But then he immediately says nature has this inexorable persistence. You can't cheat its laws. And crucially, the same rule applies, again, strictly to this force of intellect.
Ah, so the laws of nature are the laws of mind.
Yeah.
And morality, too.
That's central to his thinking here. Man's place is to be responsive, like a pipe through which their currents flow. And then he makes this huge claim, all forces are his.
All forces. How does he justify that?
Well, he means that by aligning yourself with truth, with nature's laws, you tap into immense power. He uses examples like the merchant whose credit comes from truth in his dealings, or even myths like Orpheus' charming nature. He says they're not just stories, they're experiments showing the power you unleash when you're in harmony with reality.
So being open to nature makes us receptive to celestial thoughts, leads to better relationships.
Yes, it opens up imagination, memory, science, poetry, he calls them, means and stairs for new ascensions. Virtue isn't about forcing your will, it's about taking nature's direction instead of imposing ours. It's humility leading to strength.
It really sounds like he's arguing for a kind of built-in ethical structure to the universe.
Exactly. He links it to scientific discoveries suggesting unity in forces, like Ørsted's work, and sees a parallel unity between thought and morals, mediated by nature. The grub becoming a butterfly that yielding allows the highest potential. Humility is the avenue, he says.
So our inner moral sense, our sentiment and will, actually corresponds to irresistible law in nature.
That's the core idea. Nature can be terrific, dangerous, but ultimately it breeds virtue and intellect and destroys what's harmful. Excellence is taking the lower system up into the higher, like warfare becoming strategy and code. Strength grows as the moral element prevails.
And he spells out that law very clearly, doesn't he? Sow and reap, smite and smart, serve and be served.
It's cosmic reciprocity. Daily life, he thinks, speaks this language if we just listen, stop interfering. Man is a guest in his own house, a vehicle for truth, a clod the truth has snatched from the ground. Without truth, you're just a clod again.
And truth itself can't be destroyed, even by flawed messengers.
Right. It gathers itself spotless and unhurt. It doesn't matter if its defenders are treacherous. His analogy is great. You don't doubt astronomy just because you have rheumatism. You shouldn't doubt eternal law just because we are such shabby practicers.
He's pretty direct about religion that's stuck in the past, too.
Very. Childish superstition, looking for another world when God is one and omnipresent, here or nowhere is the whole fact. The real miracle is ongoing nature and the imparting of soul. Truth, he says, is in the small things, the secrets of the heart.
He knows religious forms decay, get corrupted, but the moral sentiment is the constant critic.
Yes, it keeps pushing. The greatest dominion belongs to the deepest thought. He saw Christianity's success not in miracles, but in being the broadest and most humane doctrine for its time.
He accepts change is inevitable, right? New ages need new eyes. And he values sincere clergy over those just going through motions.
Definitely. And he sees a shift happening from faith in the past to faith in oneself, from ritual to analysis. He even notes it's become a mark of probity to say how little you believe.
A bit cynical there. Punctuality for faith and good taste for character.
Chuckles. Maybe a little. But he's hopeful real faith can reemerge. He believes the credence of men it is that molds them. The mind is shifting from focusing on circumstance to cause, from just being polite to actual love, from inventions to science, from external law to internal understanding. The key, the commanding fact, is the sufficiency of the moral sentiment. Your own inner compass is enough.
So truth equals power. Virtue is armor.
That's his view. Innocence clears the eyes, turns bad events into good. Character brings friendship, grandeur, poetic insight.
You see science bridging that old gap between spirit and matter, showing their unity, learning not to fear truth.
And the person ready for this new era needs broad learning, needs to be matriculated in the University of Sciences and Tendencies. Solid, not easily shaken. Though he does critique the modern intellect for sometimes lacking that religious submission, that humility before deeper truths. When goodness is missing, God becomes external, leading to idolatry.
He admits the analysis phase was needed, but feels ghastly if it leaves us isolated. That feeling of being alone after purely intellectual triumphs.
Right. Religion, for him, points to something constant truth, the divine that analysis can't touch. It's about moving from worshiping your ancestors' beliefs to finding your own.
True religion quiets the ego's impertinent surface action and activates the core self. He mentions humans having a St. Vitus's dance.
Yeah, this restless energy needing direction. We need to be solidaires, unified with right and love.
But still grounded. Daily events test our beliefs. The value of a principle is how much it explains.
Right, and challenges, like those facing young clergy, are just stimuli for the resolute. He champions affirmative speech, good temperament, ignore the negative, speak the positive. Opinions fade, convictions last. Sentiment, true feeling, persuades across time.
He celebrates the power of conviction, citing Hebrew genius Muhammad of the Crusades.
Examples of imagination driving action. If churches fail, it's because a new heaven forms. New understanding emerges. We have to own the duties of intellect. We need thinkers, masculine and divine men, lawgivers like Plato or Aristotle who reshape things with original perception. The intellectual life is perpetual victory. Thought starts small, spreads, causes revolutions.
And he sees a specific message for America in nature. Opportunity plus difficulty requires soul, character, intellect. Admiration comes from within. Thought is the source of everything. You are what you think. Knowing a truth others don't makes you a master.
Intellect, for him, always trumps material force. No mass which it cannot surmount. History's great moments are exertions of this force.
A thought versus an institution. A general versus artillery. Books causing revolutions. Napoleon fearing newspapers. Pindar's ode outlasting city walls. It's all about the power of ideas.
Absolutely. Though he does call out the treachery of scholars who fail to stand for ideals like freedom and justice.
And he uses army complaints to show strength is character and brains, not just muskets. Power is character. The field of thought is wide open. Strength isn't in nations or heroes, but in a single mind connected to truth.
And that brings us back to that incredible line, the wide realm of truth finds room to exist in the narrow walls of a human heart.
Wow. Just sit with that for a second. He also criticizes American shallowness, the fear of offending, of being in the minority. He wants the sincerity of nature in art and life.
And he briefly touches on war, suggesting it forces a reckoning with moral strength that peace can obscure. Battle as a field for souls, a sobering thought.
And that poem fragment, The Scholar, where thought melts matter into law, takes in the sun and moon to be born again in the mind. It's powerful imagery.
So when you take all this together, this deep belief in a unified moral and natural law, the supreme power of thought and character, How does that strike you today? Does this idea of an inherent moral law resonate? How does his view challenge our usual metrics of power and success?
And Emerson didn't just, theorize. He looked closely at people. He saw these principles playing out, sometimes imperfectly, in real lives. These case studies are fascinating.
Yeah, let's start with Dr. Ezra Ripley. Emerson pegs him as the rear guard of the great camp and army of the Puritans.
And highlights his belief in particular providence, God's direct hand in things. Sometimes maybe too particular. That anecdote from the old diary is amazing. The shea breaks.
And immediate self-blame. Have I not been proud? Am I studying enough? Am I giving enough charity? All for a broken axle.
It's wild. And then it just ends with the repair cost and selling the shea, that mix of intense piety and utter practicality.
It really paints Dr. Ripley's character, doesn't it? Sincere, punctual, strict but fair, charitable. He wore his own straitjacket of beliefs and that parochial point of view, seeing everything through Concord's lens.
Like pointing out years later who fell from grace after a church split.
Or the Sudbury minister warning the Boston guy not to pray for rain too soon or it'll flood his meadows. It's so specific.
But Emerson shows his warmth too, right? A natural gentleman, hospitable, loved people, friends were his study, the house always open.
That line about no horse from the east passing his gate, lovely detail. And Emerson notes his childlike innocence, his native temperance, no temptations. Governor Gore just said he was always right back in college. Just solid, unwavering.
Okay, so from that solid rock, we swing to the complete opposite, almost. His aunt, Mary Moody Emerson.
Oh, yeah. A singular person, lived alone, her muse, destitution and death. He suggested her epitaph, "Here lies the angel of death."
Whoa. Intense is the word.
Totally. Changeful, restless, but with these incredibly high standards. Scorn trifles, lift your aims, do what you are afraid to do. Sublimity comes from sublime motives.
And those anecdotes. Asking visitors to read just to get rid of them. Sending them on errands, shutting down a boring talker with, "How's your cat, Mrs. Tenner?"
Slight chuckle. You gotta love that. Just zero patience for dullness or pretense.
Her inner life sounds like a real battleground. Disappointment in herself when sick, mortifying sight. Versus absolute joy in returning to God. His sole presence, ineffable pleasure.
And her views.
Yeah.
Wow, war is better than oppression because it's just letting blood compared to the pinching, bitter warfare of the human heart. That's stark.
And her acceptance of God's will, even in vile imprisonment. Darkest and lightest alike welcome, ready to be a blot on creation if that's God's plan.
Feeling shame about saving money, worldly success as a shadow, valuing sadness over sleepwalking through life, seeking solitude with God, recognizing the secret martyrdom of youth. She saw things intensely.
Emerson mentions a comic tinge in her eyes, friends worrying they'd laugh at her funeral. She set an immeasurably high standard. Asking if she was a Christian in practice misses the point entirely for him. It was about the internal fire.
Two such different people, Ripley and Mary Moody Emerson, but both driven by deep conviction, just in totally opposite styles.
Which brings us to Samuel Hoar. He sounds like conscience personified, but with this quiet practicality.
Yeah, Emerson uses those Latin quotes right off the bat. Each sustains himself by his own judge. And the Cato quote, siding with the lost cause, if it's the right one. This tells you he follows his own moral compass, regardless of popularity.
Describes him as tall, sad figure, almost military bearing, respectful of himself and others, comfortable with everyone from farmers to dignitaries, loved nature, fishing, quiet guy.
And his legal skill wasn't about books, but the grasp of his mind, the simplicity of his means. He just saw the applicable law, and notably wouldn't take criminal cases.
Emerson calls him the conscience of the community. People actually asked, what does Squire Hoar think? Totally disinterested, modest, that same childlike innocence and native temperance, held no grudges, no memory of wrong and outrage.
Patient with reformers, the model gentleman of the old school. Yet Emerson felt he seemed solitary, maybe not fully appreciated even by those who knew him. A kind of deep, quiet integrity.
And finally, Thoreau, the one everyone links with Emerson, embodying that self-reliance and nature connection.
Right. French ancestry, but very strong Saxon genius.
Emerson stresses his perfect probity, his insistence on independence for himself and others. A born Protestant who chose the art of living well over a standard career, always trying to match practice to belief. Never idle, preferred paid labor.
And the details. Needing a dozen pencils at every grasp, his physical ability, swimmer, runner, skater, but even more, that mind-body connection. The length of his walk uniformly made the length of his writing. No walking, no writing.
That's amazing. It grounds his thought so physically, and his strong common sense the yardstick approach, the acorn sorting experiment, pure practical nature observation.
He had this mental ecstasy always present, that luck of good players finding the arrowhead instantly, or that fall at Tuckerman's Ravine pushing the stranger away purely on instinct. Emerson loved that.
His secret, nonconformity.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Didn't seek company, expected company to adapt to him. Superior didactics scorning their petty ways.
Slight chuckle, yep.
Yeah.
No walks to throw away on company, just wouldn't do it if it felt pointless.
And his intense localism conquered as the center of the universe, seeking out guides like Joseph Polis as authentic figures.
He could infer universal law from the single fact, see big principles in small natural details. He craved the poetic, dismissed superficial graces. Spiritual beauty mattered more than poems on paper. Said the Greeks put gods in mean outfits, they didn't need fancy clothes.
Emerson saw him as potentially prophetic through holy living, a truth speaker, physician to the wounds of any soul. Some followers saw him as a confessor, believed deeply in devotion for great work.
But Emerson doesn't shy away from the flaws. Virtues running to extremes. Demanding exact truth led to austerity, maybe more solitude than Thoreau wanted. That dangerous frankness, that terrible Thoreau. Severity sometimes hindered connection.
And that critique about ambition. Captain of a huckleberry party instead of engineering for America. Pounding beans should lead to pounding empires. Ouch.
It's a sharp critique. But Emerson ends by saying these quirks faded as Thoreau grew. His nature study was an ornament to his deeper purpose. His acute senses, his ability to find home in knowledge, virtue, beauty, that showed his profound alignment.
So looking at these four Ripley's form, Mary's fire, Hoar's conscience, Thoreau's independence, what strikes you? How do these lives illustrate living by conviction in such different ways? Which struggles or strengths feel most relevant or maybe most challenging to you listening today?
And Emerson didn't just look at individuals. He also examined how society tries to shape people, especially through education, and he wasn't impressed.
No, he found the word itself had a cold, so hopeless a sound. Made him feel paralyzed, want to yawn. He thought the system just made accountants and lawyers, not able, earnest, great-hearted men.
That's the core of it. The real goal should be moral. To teach self-trust, inspire curiosity about one's own nature, reveal the mind's resources.
He calls the system of his day one of despair. And the antidote, hope. Trusting that nature fills kids with desire for what they need to learn. We should wait and see what is this new creation.
Yeah, he contrasts the energy boys have dealing with each other with the formal classroom. Great souls need solitude, he thought. Even average people do. His advice, respect the child, respect his solitude, don't be too much his parent. But respect yourself, too. Be a companion to their thought.
He sees kids having this fresh perception, looking for something which ought to be there, and genius seeks genius, wants to learn.
But he's not against discipline. Enthusiasm and drill can coexist. Accuracy is essential to beauty. Intellect needs boundaries. Teach precision. Call things by right names. No sloppy thinking.
But the reality of school fixed hours, crowds, leads to violent means, doesn't it? Punishment, bribes, spies, instead of wise influence. Hard to be patient in a hurry. Stopping bad behavior quickly might even be more jeopardous.
His fix. Import into education the wisdom of life. Ditch the military hurry. Adopt nature's pace. Her secret is patience. Like the naturalist sitting still for hours. Requires self-command. Teach by example. Govern by the eye. See individual needs.
But interestingly, he admits he doesn't have specific reforms. Committees won't fix it. And he connects this to how people talk overuse of superlatives, most perfect, best ever, is wearisome, masks ignorance.
Yes. A little fact is worth a whole limbo of dreams. Nature has firm common sense, no bragging. He wants education and talk grounded in reality.
This critique then leads him to look at experiments trying to build new social systems.
Right, attempts to raise the social condition, like the Fourierists. Fourier had this whole utopian vision, detailed plans for communities, attractive industry, everyone speaking in blank verse.
Light chuckle. Blank verse farming. Quite a picture.
Isn't it? Emerson respected the impulse, the ability, earnestness, anger at misery. He saw so much truth in it.
But. There was a big but, wasn't there? He felt Fourier skip one fact, namely life.
Skipped life. What does that mean exactly?
Emerson thought Fourier treated people like plastic things you could just arrange into a perfect system. But true, good order can't just be imposed by force or preaching. It must not only be begun by life, but must be conducted to its issues by life. It has to grow organically from people's actual experiences and characters.
And Brook Farm was his prime example of this playing out. People trying to live more worthily, mixing manual work and study, new houses, committees, pupils, boarders, attracting idealistic people.
He admired the members young, impatient with routine, intellectual sans culottism, he calls it, full of hope, noble. They lived a great deal in a short time, came out stronger.
But he definitely saw the comic side, too. Intellectuals struggling with stoves and wood saws, gentlemen dropping clothespins at dances, the confusion when the plowman and the window gazer got paid the same, that phrase they used before we came out of civilization.
That says it all, doesn't it? Trying to build utopia and realizing how much you relied on the old ways.
And the dirty work problem, never solved. Nobody actually wanted to do it, surprisingly enough.
He describes the conventions there as disorderly, picturesque. A wild mix of people, madmen, various sects, Dunkers, Muggletonians, come-outers, innovators, Mrs. Abigail Folsom and her interminable scroll.
It sounds chaotic, but he saw value in it. It showed life, a love for religious liberty, it brought amazing people together, but ultimately the planned system hit the reality of human nature, hit life, and couldn't sustain itself on theory alone.
So, thinking about Emerson's critique of education, focusing on skills over self-trust, and his take on these social experiments, how do they speak to our world, our schools, our attempts at community building or reform? What does it mean if we today try to design systems that somehow skip life? What happens then?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here in this deep dive into Emerson's world. We've explored his ideas on those unseen forces, those hints of deeper laws, his view on where real power comes from character mainly.
Yeah, and those profound connections he saw between the natural world, our own moral sense, and the incredible power of thought itself.
We looked at his arguments for the sovereignty of ethics, his challenges to standard education, and those really vivid examples from the lives he knew: Ripley, Mary Moody Emerson, Hoar, Thoreau, and the experiments like Brook Farm.
He's always pushing us, isn't he? Look deeper, beyond status to character, beyond ritual to real feeling, beyond institutions to the power of one mind aligned with truth.
It's a strong reminder that for him, the absolute bedrock, the commanding fact, is the sufficiency of the moral sentiment, and that power ultimately is in character.
And maybe the final thought to leave you with, the really provocative one that brings it right back to each of us, is that idea that the whole wide realm of truth finds room to exist inside the narrow walls of a human heart.
What does that mean for you, personally? How you navigate your world, how you seek truth, how you build your own life? How does the power of your own mind, your own character, measure up against all the external forces and systems you deal with every day?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.